How do you start to prep to enter the messy middle? Right now, my fiance and I are on step 7, but I'm nervous for the costs of kids. Any advice or thoughts for Shane?
How do you prep for the messy middle?
I bet you have some thoughts, Bo.
Buckle up. You just strap in and hold
Metaphorically,
on.
buckle in.
Look, we talk about the messy middle, and look, it is difficult and it's hard. You feel like you have 1,000 different things pulling you in 1,000 different directions, and you're exhausted and you're busy and you don't have enough time for all the commitments. You don't have enough money for all the expenses, and you just feel stretched thin. But it's also a wonderful time. It's a great season. And so I think one of the best things you can do, Shane, is not so much financially, going into it mentally, recognize that the path and the journey is not supposed to be easy. Anyone out there who's ever had a kid has said, oh man, having kids is not easy. Not supposed to be. Anyone out there who's ever built wealth, been like, yeah, I had to sacrifice. I had to make some hard decisions to do some things to get to where I am. Yeah, it's not supposed to be easy, and that's okay. What I think you want to do is go into it with a plan. That's why we designed, Brian, will you hold the thing up for me? That's why we designed the financial order of operations, so that when you feel like you're on this path and on this journey, and all these different things are thrown at you. You remember American Gladiators?
Oh yeah.
You remember that?
Oh yeah.
And you used to have to like run through all the gladiators, and they had the pads that try to knock you over. That's the messy middle part of your financial journey. You're just like running through, trying to hold on to the ball, and they're like giant gladiators hitting you with all kinds of different things. You understand that you have the financial order of operations. You have some guardrails to keep you on the path. So even though you get knocked left or knocked right, you know that you're staying on the right path. The best way you can prepare is make sure you've done the things you're supposed to do. Do I have my deductibles covered? Am I maxing out my employer match? Do I have a fully funded emergency reserve? Am I keeping all of my high interest debt off of the balance sheet? And if you're doing those sort of things, you've prepared as well as you can financially. And then you just got to deal with, okay, well, what's this next season and next station of life have for me?
I have a unique perspective because, my oldest is a junior in college. And like when we were planning spring break this year, she didn't want to go with us, because it's that cruel reality. The more sentimental you are, because you realize your time is getting less and less, the more independent they're getting. Now, through a stroke of luck, my wife threw out a city that we were considering going to that my daughter was really in, without us knowing, she had this big interest to go to. So we got lucky and she went on spring break with us. So we got to make even more memories, which is great. But I find myself thinking as we're in this twilight of her, still being around as much as she comes home to do laundry or stuff from college, is that, man, why didn't we start earlier? And why didn't I have a third? And I remember, how hard it was. I'm not trying to minimize that messy middle period, but it is hard. I mean, because I even had, what's funny is I had a client, one of my first clients. She had 2 daughters that were probably within 18 months of each other, and I think since I didn't have many clients, it was a perfect fit, and she could call and I would just just listen to her talk about how hard life was. But now these kids, because they're still clients, by the way, they're like graduating college and out of college, and just hearing the life stories of, and experience the happiness of that's what I don't think people understand. And is that, look, I love my wife. And I put my wife before my children, but there is a love between children that it's hard to explain. It really is, and that's why money is only a tool, and it's one of and that's why when I go around and I've bullied people to buy houses around here, but also when I see people around the office that are doing well and I see they're in healthy marriages, I'm always like, what are we doing on the family side? Because it's just,
you're such an old man on the porch.
But it is. But I just know from my life.
You get those grandbabies.
Well-meaning,
and also, and I don't mind sharing this either. You don't have, the window is not as big as they nobody tells you this, is that if your spouse, your wife is 35 years old, that's a geriatric pregnancy. We go to the doctor, we're all excited, and then they scare the heck out of you. And then sure enough, there's some issues that happen with that pregnancy. So just measure twice, cut once. That's why I love being analytical, but also sentimental, is I try to tell you like it's straight, so make sure. But by the way, don't hurry it if you don't have a good partner. It's very important that's the measure twice, cut once. Make sure you are doing this with the person that's going to be there and do it right with you. Because like this weekend, my wife's going out of town for a girls trip. I'm a little scared. Because this, it's not always easy. So, because we're a team. We tackle this thing together, and I can't imagine you're doing zone defense now that you got 3 instead of 2. So it's
Well, I think it's interesting the different phases and stages. Obviously, like kids for you is expensive because you got college. Kids for me is expensive because we got like 100 different activities between all the sports and activities stuff. But Ruby, I'm curious for you because you got littles still. Like when it went from like not having kids have. Did you find that, like, from a financial perspective, it just blew everything up and the kids were so much more expensive that you just didn't know what to do with yourself? Or like, oh, okay, there were some marginal costs, but it's okay. It works.
I found it more like, okay, yeah, you have to adjust your budget and tighten some things, or like you have to be thrifty about it, or take people up if they offer to give you their old, if you kind of get a little bit creative with it, it's like, it wasn't too bad. Yeah, right? For like the really little ones, it's like it's very doable. In my experience, I know that maybe people do it differently and feel differently, but I felt like it was pretty doable.
Well, I thought, and this is like I said, I've had fresh thoughts. So my wife and I were married 5 years before we had our oldest. So we had 5 years of marriage before. When I was thinking about the spring break, I was like, man, if we just started a little early, I'd have even more years on this planet with her, that's something that kind of hit me. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't thinking about it because I am such a financial mutant and I was so tight when I was young. And that's why when I see, was it
this Shane?
Yeah. Shane, you're in step 7. You're naturally doing a lot of good things. Go check it out and then maybe go schedule a romantic night out. Check out the finances and then you'll be all right.